What's happening in Ukraine? What's happening around the world? How do you see the situation? Where are we going?
Russian people see America as an enemy. They see NATO as an enemy by large margins. There's an old Cold War hangover, and then there's what Putin's been doing for 20 years to stoke that. They don't see Ukraine as an enemy in the same way. And of course, all of the narrative and rhetoric coming out of the Kremlin has been that the Ukraine has sort of lost Russian brothers in many respects, and the Ukrainian government, the Russians have terrible things to say about, but Ukrainians, they say are Slavic brothers and fundamentally, belong in Russia. And so I think if this had been a war against the US or a war against NATO, Putin could have expected to have a certain resonance among his population. But I think the fact that this is very purely a war against Ukraine undermines a lot of the messages and runs counter to a lot of the messages giving his people. And I think a lot of Russians are just saying to themselves, why are we doing this? I mean, that is what they're saying. People are saying, why are we doing this? And as the sanctions hit, and as the economy gets worse, along with the threat of sanctions, which was not effective in deterring him, the Biden administration did really work hard to learn about, to penetrate Russian plans, to conduct information operations, to conduct false flag attacks, to try to assassinate Zelensky, to try to conduct a coup d'etat. And they publicized what they learned. They really were very, very fast to declassify intelligence and publicize all of the Russian attempts to create this fictitious universe to gaslight us and persuade us that this is somehow Ukraine's fault and the Ukrainians had prompted this. And it was a very skillful campaign that the Biden administration ran. Now, we need to be careful about over-crediting them, because I think that they did think that by doing all of that, they would deter Putin from attacking, because they were presenting him with the reality that he would have to go in without any informational cover. And at the end of the day, Putin decided he just didn't care and he was going to go in anyway. So the campaign failed from the perspective of what it was, I think, intended to do, which was to deter him. But it did put him in this very bad spot where he's stripped of informational cover. He is nakedly the aggressor. And the international community, at least in the first week of this war, has largely, with a couple of notable exceptions, rallied against him in a way that we really haven't seen it rally against anyone.
You showed the corruption both of Putin and the oligarchs. What did you learn about the corruption, and what did you learn about Vladimir Putin?
So we were exposing corruption in Gazprom and other companies that I was invested in. I was expelled and declared a threat to national security for exposing corruption in state companies, which they should have been happy to try to get rid of that corruption. After I was expelled, my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, discovered a major $230 million government corruption scheme. He reported it, testified against the officials involved, and in retaliation, he was arrested, tortured for 358 days in Russian custody. And what it shows is that Vladimir Putin is a criminal. He's a guy who is interested in protecting the ill-gotten gains of himself and the people around him. He will kill to protect those ill-gotten gains. And everything about his narrative that he's a patriot and that he's looking after the interests of Russia are exposed as being false and a lie, just based on the story of me and my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky. Sadly and scarily, I know Vladimir Putin very well. I've been involved in a conflict with him, a very heated conflict over the last decade. And what I've learned about Vladimir Putin is that he never backs down. He can never show weakness. He always escalates. And he's not interested in the national interest of Russia. He's only interested in staying in power. And he'll pretty much do anything if he can stay in power. And so I don't think anything is off the table with Vladimir Putin.
You were the largest, at one point, financial investor, foreign financial investor in Russia. What will these sanctions mean to the Russian economy, and what things can we expect?
What affects Putin the most is not necessarily the ones that do the most damage to the economy. What affects Putin the most is the ones that does damage to the oligarchs, these multi-billionaire individuals that we see on the Forbes list and the ones sailing around in their yachts. And the reason that Putin cares about that most is because they hold his money for him. And so if we're trying to make a direct statement to Vladimir Putin and go after his own personal interests, that's the one that really stings him. The list of oligarchs by all the countries is still fairly short. There's a number of people who are supporters of the regime, who are trustees of Putin's money, who are enormously wealthy, who we can go after, and those names need to be added to the list. And then the last thing which I've been discussing, and this is really important, is that the governments can't go after the assets if they don't know where they are. And there's a lot of people working in the City of London and working in banks in New York and other places that have been involved in hiding the assets for the oligarchs. And so there should be amendments to the sanctions law, which requires all of the Western enablers to come forward with information about the Russian oligarchs who they're looking after. And that should be put into the law. There should be penalties, including prison, for those people if they don't come forward with that information to the government. We could have stopped this invasion by all working together, all going after, on a narrow basis, Putin's interests. But we're now in a situation where Vladimir Putin has declared major war in Europe, and everything has to be thrown at him, everything. And we have sanctioned SWIFT, in other words, unplugged a number of Russian financial institutions from the main information connecting network. But we've only done it for 70% of Russian banks. And so what's going to happen very quickly is that the Russians will modify all of their payments to go through the other 30% of the banks. And so that needs to be fixed. That needs to be upgraded so all Russian financial institutions can no longer transfer money in and out of the country. I mean, it's painful for the average Russian. Vladimir Putin is not eating less well because of that. Well, basically, for every European household that's heating their house with Russian gas, we're paying money to the Russians for their war machine to invade neighboring countries. And so we shouldn't be doing that. And unfortunately, it's not something that you can just change overnight. This should have been dealt with a long time ago. It perplexes me why Germany has become more dependent on Russian gas over the last 10 years than less dependent. Russia has been using gas as a weapon for a long time, and certainly gas is the main way in which they fund their illegitimate activities. And so going forward, I think that there needs to be a major rethink of how Europe gets their gas, and they need to find ways, including ways of having to pay more so that they're not dependent and not funding Russia. There needs to be a major rethink, and Germany just announced that in the last couple of days that they're going to do that. It's an extremely important part of not funding Vladimir Putin and not being dependent on Vladimir Putin.
Help by spreading this message. Share with your friends, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Turn on notifications to stay updated.